April, new day to you, everybody. This is Rabid Hedgehog, and what April means to us: 1 year with the Rebel 500. By far the most popular motorcycle that we have had on this channel, and quite frankly, one of my favorite bikes to play around with. So today on this commute to work, I just want to talk about what it has been like to have a Rebel 500 as a commuter bike for most every day that I can, even though it shares a lot of time with a CB1100 and Vulcan S and CX 500C, so this bike shares the garage time with quite a few bikes. So in that 1 year, it's put on 2,401 mile, and they have been completely and utterly trouble-free, except for losing that that reflector, which, to be honest, to figure out what happened to that rear light, I do not know to this day. Because whenever we went to replace it, the funny thing about it was the little grommet that was in there, plus the screw that holds it on there, was actually still in the light receptacle. So it's like whoever put this together or whatever brought it in for the first time did not take a look at that, and that's where it ended up. That's why it that's why it fell out. So that was the funny part. However, she's still having funny things with the lights here at 2,400 miles. Now here's the thing: in Oklahoma, we don't have to have both the auxiliary lights on at all times. We can have those off, and just as long as the headlight's fine and the blinkers are fine. So in the front here, you'll see that is blinking, but it's off right now because the 2-filament bulb, the second filament, burned out, so it doesn't have the DRL right now. So yeah, now funny thing with the lights still happening. Now, other than those two things, those are extremely stupid minor. Those are so easy to do. They're less than $10 a replacement cost for both of them. So it's not a bad deal to have a motorcycle go a full year at 2,400 miles to only have $10 worth of parts needed because of weird circumstances. But this bike has been absolutely beautiful. The maintenance cycle on it was very easy. Of course, it is a unit built engine. Transmission and engine are combined is what unit built means. It's not like a Sportster where it's quasi unit built, where the Sportster's oil is shared with the transmission but not the primary. This one, the primary, the transmission and everything are all one unit, so you only use one hole for all the oil. So it's real simple to do an oil change on one of these. The oil filter is very prominent on the front side of it, and it's very easy to get to the single drain plug on the bottom. Now, in terms of how it's broke in, this bike has come alive a little bit more. I remember the first videos we did with it, it was still kind of shaky, but to be honest, come on people, it's not that hard today. But to be honest, I mean, it's just one of those things where bikes have to loosen up, have to break in and all that. And I remember it was funny when the guy was sitting there going, now you're going to be breaking in a machine, remember it's going to make more noise as it gets older and all this other stuff. And I'm sitting there going, how bad could that be, and why is he giving me that warning? It's like I've never owned a Honda at that point, only the Harleys. And to be honest, Harleys did make a ton of noise. Whenever they did break in, you start getting a little bit more valve noise, primary noise, and all that stuff. They'd start going in that direction. But this one, it has had no change in its voice or engine noises or anything like that since I have gotten it. But I also put it on the sands and stuff like that and tightened down everything at intervals and stuff like that just to make sure. And to be honest, it's pretty much overkill at this point, because every time I've done it so far, everything's been fine. The chain has needed 2 adjustments. It has stretched out a bit, but that's not very hard to do. This bike literally is one of the easiest bikes to get a chain adjustment on. You simply just line everything up and, you know, loosen up the axle nut, and then you go back to the adjusters, hit them, get it to where you want it to be, and then get them back all together and tightened up, and you're good to go. Most bikes are like that, so this one's real easy too, to just get that chain adjusted, and you can do it yourself. A lot of this bike is you can do it yourself, and that's kind of why I chose it as the beginner bike over the Vulcan S. A lot of people have questioned that, and it's also because you can spin wrenches on this bike super easy too. The Vulcan S does have ABS, at least the model variant I have does, which means you cannot bleed your own brakes. Because if you were to bleed your own brakes, you would miss the ABS controller box in the process, and you will have bubbles in the system. So that is very hard to do, because you have to have the computer go through and activate the pumps in there and shake out all the air and all that fun stuff. So it's a little bit different on the maintenance, whereas this one is not an ABS model. Now, is there ABS models for the Hondas? Yes, there are. So if you buy one of these, don't take that particular statement 100%, because you may have an ABS model and I don't. So I chose the non-ABS model mostly because I've been riding for so long, I don't necessarily need it, and I don't think these brakes are gonna really cause you an issue whenever you're going in for hard braking. And I've had to hard brake with this motorcycle many a times now, because the way these people drive around here, and I never have once really locked her out or backed her in or done anything scary despite not having ABS. This one's more of, it's just a linear output of braking. It's not like a stab and you're diving already. It pretty much, well, as soon as you grab the levers and the push down on that pedal, it's more linear, and that's why some people don't like it. It's not as fast acting. Now that, to me, as light as this bike is, I've never once felt anything dangerous on this motorcycle. With my Street 500, there were moments, or Street 750, excuse me, which is the same braking system and everything as the Street 500. That's why I wanted to compare them. But with the Street 750 I had a lot of moments where I would push on the pedal and pull on the lever and nothing was happening for a very, very long time. And it was not linear at all. It literally just felt like a sponge the whole way down. I mean, you could lock it up, but you had to really, really try. And that's something that's kind of scary, especially for when you're brand new at riding. You want a bike that's brakes, don't stab, and actually work somewhere in between, not working and working, which, you know, this bike thoroughly hits right in the middle. And that's the whole thing. It's not necessarily a bad braking system, it's just not for enthusiast riders who are able to come to a full 1.5G or 1G stop. You know, these folks need to understand that it's not a racing machine, so you don't have hard working brakes like that. So I just wanted to get some of that out of the way, as I've seen some more comments about brakes. These brakes have never been an issue to me. Like I said, they are very linear in how they deliver. They actually do work, and they actually have decent response and everything. So don't ever worry about those. Now, when it comes to the speedometer and everything of that nature and dealing with it in the sunlight, it has not been an issue. You can adjust the brightness selection on these speedometers by holding the button at the regular odometer until it brings up your menu system, and you can scroll over from, you know, KPH and all that stuff to change the lighting on there as well. So I've gotten that turned up where I can see it at all times and not really care about it. Now, I know that there might be some shimmering and glimmering and losing the speed there, but that's just because of the way the frames per second of filming is versus the LCD and how it's refreshing and displaying. So there's nothing wrong with that. It is a very visible speedometer. I do still seriously wish that there would be more information on it, like a gear counter and other things of that nature. But to be honest, it gives you all the information you need, and even a lot of bikes in this category, like the Bolt and all that, don't have those, and they don't have a fuel gauge, and this one does. So you have a cool little add-on to it. But this bike has been fantastic. I mean, I use this to just bomb around the city like I'm doing right now. I know it looks like I'm on the interstate, but I'm pulling into town, because this is just how I commute. I live up in an area where the interstate makes it faster for me to go, you know, anywhere I want to go. So I just hop on it, go wherever I'm heading, and I use this bike quite a bit to go carving into the city because it's so nimble and so easy to use, and the You know, the power's enough to get away from traffic, from stoplights. You know, I mean, it's simple to just hold on to. The wind doesn't really affect it as bad as you would think it would. I mean, I've been in some 50-mile-an-hour winds on this motorcycle, and it doesn't really phase it at all. It's kind of like when I was riding the V7, or the V7 actually, excuse me. You can just point it into the wind, you know, slightly lean, and it's totally fine. It holds very stable. These big tires have been fantastic. Now you ask about what about the suspension and the seat. I haven't changed them yet in the whole year. I have grown to tolerate them. And that's the funny part. I have grown to tolerate the seat and the suspension. But the suspension does settle. Somebody once said, what kind of bullcrap is that? Hold on now. You got to remember, this is metal. This is oils. This is springs. They do wear out over time, and with my weight and the way I ride, these springs and this suspension did settle a little bit, and that did take away some of the excessive bounciness. Is it still soft? Does it still dive? Yes. The front fork still needs to have better suspension and better, stiffer springs, but it is not as bad as it was. But when you dive into a hard corner, it still does have that bounce, and it still does kind of wobble through some of the tighter turns and doesn't have the full stability, mostly because it's bouncing because it's too soft. So the suspension, you know, that still needs some work, but that's easily remedied. There's a lot of companies out there now, up to even Olin's, who actually make suspension setups for this bike now, and you have no excuse if you're having suspension problems that you can't just buy suspension. But like I said, I have grown to tolerate it. And the seat, it still punishes my rear, but let's be honest, it's not the worst seat. I mean, if you've rode some of the dual sports and some of the dirt bikes and things that I started out with, well, guess what? You're going to be dealing with terrifying seating anyway. So, you know, that simply is the only thing. After 1 year, I kept everything the way it was because it wasn't as bad as initially thought. And that's the whole deal. When you're coming around with a motorcycle, yeah, your first initial impressions can be a little negative, especially if you're doing a test ride. And I do understand this too. As a rider, you definitely want to find a motorcycle that is right for you. When you test ride it, you want to make sure everything works the way you expect it and you want it. So this bike was bought completely blind, and I had a little bit more rant in me than I needed to, because this little bike has been very lovely for the last year. And I have really no complaints. I mean, the maintenances are so easy on this. I've adjusted cables. I've done all the lube work on them. I've done everything on this bike, and it's the simplest one I've ever had to work with. The Harleys were so difficult because there's so many different things that you had to lube and work on and do that. And this one is just out in the open, easy to get to. The engine's been spot on every time. I've never had any problems with it, even if it sits for a few weeks while the others are being ridden. I still come back to her. She still fires up, cold, hot, and all that. She has been very good for the first year, and one of my favorite motorcycles that I have owned, despite some of the shortcomings that I initially reported. So, at any rate, this is the Rabid Hedgehog, and this is my 1 year, 2,400 now 10 miles review of the Rebel 500. If you have any more questions about Belle and her longevity with me, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer those. And that way, if you're looking for one of these beautiful motorcycles, you can go with confidence that you know that you're getting the right bike. Keep that shiny side up, folks, and we will catch you on that next review.